So thanks everyone for letting me come, and thank you, Mark and Mark, for letting me come to present. This is a topic I love, and I've spoken about this before. So let me jump into things. Just real quick about me. I won't bore you with all the details, but the big thing, I do a lot in Power BI and the Power Platform, a lot of Power Automate, a lot of Power Apps. I'm on part of the Enterprise DNA expert team, if you're familiar with that website, and actually created a course module that actually goes through a number of these type of integrations with Power BI and Power Apps and Power Automate. And then I've dabbled in some other areas in technical. And of course, Mark, talking to you and talking about Fox Pro, I never got into that, but it was the Access. I started actually doing a lot in Access way back in the day, and then SQL and so on. So, all right. So what I want to do is talk about integrating Power BI with Power Automate and Power Apps. One of the things I love is how well that they integrate well together. And the other thing what I am passionate about is how you can use these tools for your day-to-day processes, and and I'll kind of show some examples and potentially how you can apply this. If you're not familiar with Power Apps and Power Automate, I mean, so here as a quick example, I mean, Power BI, it's great for analyzing data and viewing data. Power Apps, I see this as great for the manipulating data, creating it, editing it, deleting it. And then Power Automate for automating tasks, which of course we tend to find in a lot of our day-to-day operations. What I like to do is sort of set a case study and kind of walk through, because I think it helps give an example to kind of set the stage as I go through some examples. So, and this is hypothetical, but let's just assume I manage a team and they handle projects, and the projects have project managers. So I have a nice little Power BI report that I've created to monitor project statuses, and these are some tasks that I have to do. So I have to email project managers for status updates. I'll show some of this, and maybe I have to review some documents on SharePoint, and I want to track the metadata, the status, and of course there's always that I need statuses from project managers, so they have to go in and update that. So let's go ahead and jump over here, and I'm going to start with Power Automate, but let me give sort of a couple of examples, and let me jump over to my Power BI report. So I've got, and let me go to I'm going to do Power BI desktop. I'm going to do a quick check. Mark, are you seeing my Power BI desktop?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is just a simple Power BI report. Don't hold this against me in terms of the look and feel. But what I've got here is, so I'm managing this project, and you can see there's, let me just go ahead and clear this. I can see a bunch of projects here, and they've got an ID and project name and some start and end dates and so on. So I am the project manager. So what I want to first do is I get into Power Automate and talk about some automated tasks. Now, if you haven't dabbled in Power Automate before, let me just jump over to, you can actually access Power Automate, in Microsoft by going here to makepowerautomate.com. But what I'm going to do is we're going to actually do a lot of this work directly and integrate it directly into Power BI. Now, the first example I always like to give, because I find it's the easiest, is refreshing data. So I've got a bunch of buttons up here. I'm going to kind of walk through some various examples. But even if you haven't touched Power Automate, to me, I have found it so easy to jump in and learn. So we're going to do a couple of simple examples. So the first one is I want to refresh the data, right? And because I like this one, it's a very easy one to show, and it's a very easy one to implement. So we're going to go ahead and recreate this. So that's this button here. If I push this button, it's going to basically be the same as if I triggered a refresh up here. So let's go ahead and create this button, because, and I'll show really how easy it is to do. I'm simply going to go over to my visualization pane. Here is the button for Power Automate. I will click it, and it will open up, and it'll give me it gives me some instructions. Now, this is a new change, and I'm actually thrilled about this. I'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but the first thing it's going to do is ask me about in my environment. So this is brand new. In the past, you were not allowed to select your environment. When you work in the Power Platform, you have what's called environments, and every Power Platform tenant has a default one. And when you were doing this, in fact, when I gave this last presentation, this was not an option. They have now allowed it to where you can actually choose your different environments. Won't go into that, but just be aware that if you're into Power Platform, this is a great enhancement. So that'll tell you what to do. The next one it says is to add data. Drag the fields that you need in your flow. Well, I don't need any fields in my flow for this example because I'm just refreshing the data. So I'm going to just skip it. And that would be over here if I wanted to add any field. And then the last thing is it'll tell me if I expand this, set up your flow, click on the edit, which is way up here. So let me just minimize this a little bit and I'll go up here and I will go to edit. Now what this is going to do is it's going to send me right over to Power Automate within Power BI. And there's going to be, sometimes you really need to do this, and I will talk about that in a second. But this is actually fully integrated here. And now what you're going to see is I can go ahead and create a new flow, or I can apply one. You can see I have a whole bunch of flows already applied here, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. You can even scroll down and there are some templates up here which give other ideas. But in my purposes, I'm just going to do a new, and I'll do an instant cloud flow. Now what this is going to do is send me now to Power Automate. So if I was actually doing this in Power Automate, it would have a very similar look and feel, although Microsoft is changing the user interface, but this is the older interface. And this first thing it automatically creates is what's called a trigger. That when you create a flow in Power Automate, the first step is always a trigger because that's what kicks off the flow. And it'll say here, no additional information is needed. And now I can add the next step. And I just do new. And then there's going to give me all of this thing. One of the things that is really, that I find exciting about Power Automate is that the available connectors. Now, Power BI, I'm just going to go ahead and search Power BI, is one of the connectors, but there are a whole bunch of other connectors in here. And I believe at last check, there's over 1,000. So things like a lot of your Office products, right? Teams and SharePoint and Power Apps and so on. But when you get into third party like Salesforce and Slack and there's just an Adobe, there's just many, many connectors that you can really get into. But now that I've connected to my Power BI, it's going to show me right here all of the actions now that I can do. And in my case, I'm gonna actually just search for refresh because I want to refresh the data set, and there it is. I'm just going to go ahead and select it. It asks me what's the workspace, so I'm going to choose my workspace. And I believe it is this one, and it would be one of these reports. I may or may not have, oh, there it is. I think that's the report right there. And then I would just go ahead and save this, give this a name. Let's just call this, I'll just call this refresh. I'll call this San Fran refresh button. And I will save it. It takes a few seconds here to save, and then I need to apply it. Now, the one next thing I hope that Microsoft will do is if I go back, let me go back to my report. Now that flow has been applied to my button, just be aware that if I go back here to edit it, it doesn't tell me right away. Now, there's one at the top here, but it would be really nice if there was some kind of checkbox or some kind of indication as to what has been applied. I've not seen one. So just be aware that when you do apply one, I'm not aware of any way to actually see what has been applied. But now that it's there, if I were to go ahead, and of course I can change all the formatting and as you see here, refresh data. If I go ahead and trigger it, if I just click on it, now what happens is it's gone ahead and triggered a refresh. And that's pretty much as simple as that. Now, one thing to be aware of with refreshing is if the refresh fails, because perhaps I have some issue on the refresh, this flow will not fail, because all it did is it told it to refresh. But right there, in just a couple of minutes, I've created my first flow to refresh. Now, this one's not too exciting, but I do use this often because when I get into my Power App demo with other users, I tend to have one of these as well. So we'll put that as a parking lot. But let's get into something a bit more useful that I tend to find, I think, is a great use with Power Automate and Power BI. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this for now because I already have one right here, and it's the email one. So I'm going to jump to my next task as the person who oversees this team, and I'm going to change my status here to past due. And I can see that I've got 7 projects that are past due. And of course, what do we normally do? We have to email the project manager. So I would go to my email, I would go to Outlook, and I would send Larry an email and send Paul an email. Maybe what I do is I export this data to a spreadsheet and then email it to all of them and say, hey, everyone, what is the status of your projects? But I don't want to do that because I want to take advantage of Power Automate, and I have a button right here. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to ask everybody here for an update, and I'm just going to click this button and I'm going to trigger it. What's happening behind the scenes now is it's sending emails now to every one of these individuals. I actually have it being sent to me. Let's see if it works properly here. It may take a second. But what will happen is I actually will have these emails sent to me rather than going to the individual just to kind of see how they are. And let's see, it's not, oh, here, let's see here. There we go. Okay, here they are. I always get nervous when there's a pause because I'm like, oh, was anything not set up? But it just took a second for timing. So here they are. Here is all the emails. And the other thing is these are tailored to the specific record. So this one here for project number 117, it goes to Adele. I've got the ID here. I've got the name right here. So I have tailored this email to pull in dynamic information directly from my report. So that would be right here. And of course, there was one for every email. Now, in this example, Larry is getting 3 emails. I could, of course, update my flow so that Larry gets 1 and there's a very nice table. But let's walk through how this was done. And I'm going to actually go ahead and just open this one up. And I'm going to walk through the steps to kind of show you. We'll just kind of walk through these steps and see just how easy it is. So I'm going to go ahead in here and let's edit this one. And I believe it'll be this one right here. And you'll see there's no indication as to which one. So let's go ahead and just edit this one. And I will walk through each step. And then it probably even just recreate a couple one. In fact, actually, you know what I'm going to do? Let's back this up. I'm going to go ahead and let's create a new one because this one will be is nice and easy to walk through as a good example. So let's reset up a new button. Let's resize it here. Now this one is I do want data fields. Remember in my first example, I didn't include any data fields over here. What I do want though is I want to send some data over to my Power Automate. And I want things such as I want the project ID. I want the project manager. I want this information. So I'm going to go over here to my data. I'm going to pull in, let's say I'm going to pull in the project manager. I'm going to pull in the project ID. Maybe I want the project name. And then I need email addresses, right? And let's see, I'm going to include email, and email test is actually set to go to me just so that we can actually see them. So this is the data that I'm going to send. Now, here's also a nice little tip I always like to give. It's nice to see what data is actually being sent to Power Automate. If I actually just expand this, let's move this to a table, and I'll just switch it over to a table. This is all the data now that is being sent to my Power Automate flow. Also, the other thing to be aware of is this is also interactive with your report. Let's say I just select one record. You'll see it has highlighted there as well. So keep that in mind because I'm going to come back to that as well. But great little tip to know what data is being sent to your flow. Very, very important. So Let's go ahead and switch this back now to a flow. Again, it's offering me the environments. I am going to leave it in the default environment for now for this purpose. And let's go ahead and edit the flow. All right, let's go ahead and create a new one. Now again, Power BI button click, no additional information is needed. So let's go ahead and add our next step. Now the next step is I want to send an email. Now I can do a couple of things. One is I can go through here and try to find my connector, which I'm using Office 365. And the other nice thing which I have found is it's sometimes nice to just type in what you want, send an email. And I am, let's see here, see if it, maybe because I've chose it. There we go. Let's see if I can do this again. And it's going to pull up different ones, send an email, and y'all see here, I find the right connector. So I could go here to Office 365, but I'm going to go here because I know this is the one I want. Now, if I'm using obviously a different connector, a different mail, I would choose that one. But in my case, I am this one. Okay, where's it going to go? Now, here's the great thing about Power Automate and Power BI is what's called dynamic content. I don't want to have to type in the person's email address. I want to be able to actually pull in that dynamic content. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, what you're going to see is it's already pulling in. It's showing me the two fields that I have that are emails. I've got the user email, but this is the one I want. Now, this is the one that I want because I know what'll be sent to the email address. But let's just assume this is the email address of the person that is to receive it. One thing you might have just noticed is it wrapped this around and applied to each because keep in mind, Power Automate knows that when I click this button, this could have multiple rows of data. So it's going to apply these steps contained in this container to each item in that in my whole entire data set. So it's added that in. It's just re-added this. It just made it a little easier for me. And it's there. So now the subject, I will say I need update for project. And let's add in the project name. Again, going to come down here. And this is the dynamic field that is now pulling that field from my Power BI report. And I can say, dear project manager. And again, this is all rich text, so I can do bold. Please provide me an update for project and project name, and I can even highlight it and I can bold it. And there it is. Let me go ahead and save this. Let's give it a name. Let's call it San Fran email test. I will now save. And I will go ahead and apply this. And it's applied. Let's go back and let's see if I can just, there you go. And let's go ahead and I'll trigger this. And now 7 individuals should get that email. Probably take a few seconds here. And there it is. I can hear the dings coming in and there they are. So very easy for me to quickly tailor and send automated emails. And again, like I said, I could even really make this thing extensive. And I think I might have an example. Let's see if I had one. Oh, I don't. One of the things too is like I'm just using very simple rich text, but the other thing too with emails, like if you're into HTML, I mean, there is an option to actually do HTML coding. You can include cascading style sheets. You can include images. So you really can spruce up the emails. But the bottom line is I'm able to take all of this dynamic data and use that into my dynamic email. So Mark, I'm going to pause. Any questions that have popped up in the chat? I'm not seeing any, but wanted to just pause.
Nope, none have been posted.
I see you do a hand, Lisa.
Yep, go ahead, Lisa.
I didn't put up my hand. I don't know what happened. Sorry.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so great way to do this. Here's one thing I'm gonna touch on, and I always like to do this, especially with Power Automate. And I'll probably even mention it at the end, but I always like to mention it because of personal experience, and that is be very careful because once you trigger these flows, you know, you want to make sure you're doing it right. For example, let's just say, I've got my send emails button here, right? Let's say I want to do past due. I accidentally just hit all and I trigger the flow here. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, I didn't want to do that because all of a sudden now everybody is getting emails. I can hear them and now I'm going to get 20 emails. Now this is only 20. What happens if this was 2,000? So one of the things to be aware of when doing Power Automate is once you trigger that button, there's no confirmation that says, are you sure? So one thing I do like to do, and I always like to hit this early on because I just find this to be very important, is especially with Power BI, I like to kind of create my own confirmation. So I have this button here, and if I click on it, I get this confirmation pop up. Let me actually cancel this real quick. I'm going to actually let me remove this. But if I click here, now I get a confirmation that says, hey, you are going to select to send 20 emails. Please indicate if you want to. And I could be like, whoa, I didn't want to do that. So let me cancel that. So a quick little trick that I like to throw in that I have done, which I have found very helpful, is if when I do this, this is simply just using a few bookmark tricks with Power BI, is I have created a group. Let's see, where's my selection? I've got a little group here that simply consists of, if I show it, this shape here is this gray rectangular semi-transparent shape. I've got a text box, which is built in to kind of display my text. And then I've got a cancel button. And then here is the actual Power Automate button that I've embedded. And then I just create a couple of bookmarks here to show or hide the confirmation. So if I want to hide it, I think this is the one. Maybe this one is not working here. Yep, there it is. If I just have a couple of bookmarks to show this group or hide it. And that is just a quick little tip with regards to giving your users perhaps a confirmation. I like to do that. All right. Let's move into another example. I'm just taking a quick glance over to the chat, not seeing any questions. Let's go on to my next example with Power Automate that I like to do. And that is one of the other tasks I have to do. And you can kind of see here, let me change the status. Let's just say part of my job is I have to review a document. And I've got a couple of documents. Let me jump over to my SharePoint. And let's just say I've got some documents here that as part of the effort, these could be scopes of work, project plans, whatever. And let's say part of it is, you know what, I have to review them and I have to approve them. So I can see here, I've got 2 that are I've approved, and I have 3 down here that I have to review. So of course it's, click on each one, and maybe I got to go here and change the details. But again, very time consuming. So because I can pull all of this data into Power BI, including I've got hyperlinks directly to the ones that I want, I could just click on one and say, you know what, let's go ahead and click on that. There it is. Hey, this looks great. I want to let me jump back over to my Power BI report. I have looked at this one and this one, and I want to actually mark them as approved. So I've got an actual flow here that I have set up. I'm going to go ahead and trigger this, and then I'll actually walk through it. And I'm going to jump back over here. I'm actually going to close my mail because I seem to keep getting messages. But what I've done, if I jump back to my Power BI, is these 2 examples, project 105 and 106, I want to mark them as approved because I've already looked at them. I've looked here, I've clicked on this, I've clicked that button, and now let me refresh my SharePoint list, and these 2 should be marked as approved, as they are. Because now what I can do is use the SharePoint connector to make changes to my SharePoint documents. So I'm going to walk through that. And again, this is just another example of things that can be done in Power Automate. So let me walk through that one. We'll go ahead and just kind of review that. Not sure why that's popping up, but in here it is. It's this one right here. I'm going to go ahead and edit it, and we're going to walk through this one. And again, you'll see that apply to each, because again, it is possible that we click on many things, but all I have here now is when I click on the Power BI data, and let me jump back before I forget. I'll show that what I'm doing is I am passing along the ID. So in my documents, there is an ID, which is tied to my SharePoint ID. That's the field I'm passing along. So if I were to actually look at it, again, convert that to a table, and you'll see it's a little hard to see here. ID, these is ID 3 and 4. So let's send that back to a button here, and let's go ahead and walk through that button. And I'll go ahead and edit it. And again, I'll open it. And so what I'm going to need is, if I go to, I have this update file properties. So let me go ahead and show you. If I'll just add an action. If I go to the SharePoint connector, which I tend to find I use these quite a bit because there's just so much capability. There is just a number of things you can do. Add attachments, check in files, create an item in a SharePoint list. You can create a new folder. And the one I'm using is update file properties, which if I keep scrolling all the way down somewhere, there it is, update file properties. It's this one right here. So there are a number of different actions that you can do in SharePoint. So let's go ahead and expand it though and see what it does. And again, it almost walks you through it. You choose the site, you choose the library, and it needs the ID. So again, I'm pulling in that dynamic, that data. This is the field that I've sent it. So it's going to pull that in, and it already knows because I'm pointing to the my documents library. It pulls in the custom columns that I have, and here is the one column, so I can change it to be either approved or in review. So it gives me that capability. So it's really just this one step that will be done to make changes to my SharePoint document library. I'm going to pause if there's any questions on this.
No questions posted on this, just a question about location of this video at a later date. And I put that URL in the chat. So
okay.
Thank you.
All right. So again, very, very, very simple to do. Now, a couple of things to be aware of. I'm going to go back to my email example. Let's say in my email example, the one I did right here, I realized that, I want to add an additional message to my email. Now I can certainly go here and go edit and edit the flow. Let's go ahead and I'll just edit this one. I can go ahead and edit it here, and I could go here and make the changes. Okay, and let's say I want to add some more dynamic content. So one thing I want to kind of show you is when I go to dynamic content, you see all the dynamic content that is available from my Power BI button. Again, these are all the fields I've added, so you can see them here, and I can add this. But I'm going to show a different way and show you the one difference to be aware of, and that is I'm going to jump over to Power. Let's go over to Power Automate itself. Again, I'm on Power Automate Online now. Let's actually go ahead and look at the flow there, because I can access the flow right here. And let me go ahead and I'm in a different environment. This is, a similar flow. So let's go ahead and edit this. So I could go ahead and edit the flow, but I'll show you the one difference to be aware of. So this will pull it up. Let's see, and there's probably a few here. Okay, so send an email. So I could go in here and I could say, thank you, management. I want to, oops, moved my screen over. I could go here and make changes as I want. But the one difference is, let's say I want to add more dynamic content, right? I got dynamic content over here. There's no Power BI dynamic content. All of these fields that you see while they show up, I no longer have access to them in here. The only way to have access to them is by going and doing your editing through Power BI when you need that. So that is one thing one little nuance to be aware of when integrating with Power Automate and Power BI. But the message here is you can make changes to your flows outside as long as you don't need that content. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out. Let's go. And now we'll go ahead and all right, Mark, how are we on time? 10:40, correct? 7:40.
7:40, correct.
Okay.
Pacific. Yep.
And I see Lisa has a question. Can you call a flow from a flow? For example, in your SharePoint flow, could you call your refresh after changing the document so the flow report would show that change, or do you have to replicate these steps with the SharePoint flow? I think I understand what you're meaning, Lisa, and I think the answer is yes. I mean, you can certainly do that. Let me make sure I'm answering your question. Let's go to the send an email. Let's say I send that email. I believe it was this one here. You can add many, many steps. I can do more things. Let's refresh the data set. I'll go here, refresh my data set. I'll go to my workspace. Let's go, I think it was this one. And it's there. And maybe what I want to do is, you know what, I want to email somebody else. I want to email myself, send an email. So I could send an email to myself now. Flow complete. And again, maybe at the same, and maybe I also want to do something in Teams. So point being here is this flow could keep going on and on and on. Lisa, did that answer your question, if I understood it correctly?
Sorry, I'm a little hoarse, so I put it in the chat.
That's not it. I know you can replicate, but I am asking whether one flow can directly call another flow so you can. So I am going to say I don't know. I do know you can. I have worked with parent and child flows. I want to say I don't know because I've not necessarily worked with that. I'm always one to. Rarely do I say it's no, because usually I find there's a way. So if it's a case where you trigger one flow and it triggers another flow, I do know there is one thing of parent and child flows in Power Automate when you get into solutions. Yeah, if it's a child flow, yeah, I would anticipate the answer to that is yes. So did that answer the question? Yep, thank you. Okay. All right. Those were, let me double check to make sure I have doing. Now there are many other things that can be done in Power Automate. Like I said, I mean, you can update Teams message, update team channels and so on. The point being, what I always think about is the thing about Power BI is you have all this data, and all of it becomes dynamic. When you think about all of your automation tasks and all of the connectors and all the groups you work with, such as Teams, and let's say you work with Salesforce and other things, all of a sudden now, all of that becomes potentially able to be integrated together with this type of capability. So to me, I think this is scratching the surface. And there is just so many more things that can be done with regards to Power Automate. And I'm going to jump back to my presentation because I have a couple of, again, here are some simple examples that I've pulled up here. The one I tend to find most common is doing the emails, but again, posting to Teams and so forth. It's just the sky is, I think, just sky's the limit. Couple of warnings I like to kind of throw out. Again, the when triggering a flow, no confirmation, but create your own. I actually have a YouTube video, a very small one. Not that I'm gonna play it, but recently I did one, I don't know, a while ago, called adding safety measures that I've thrown in there in addition to the confirmation that I showed here. Is I've done other things like within the flow, I set a limit if more than X number of records are sent to the flow, because like I said, you don't want to have a flow where all of a sudden you wanted to send 20 records and it was 2,000, and let's say their emails going out across your organization. So be very, very mindful of that. That's that second tip. Beware of what your data is being sent. The other tip, remember, always switch it to a table so you can see. The other thing too, along with that, is especially in your report, I'm going to give another example because this is what happened to us once. Is let's clear this status. Here's the status. And I decide, you know what, I'm going to add a filter here to this table where the status is in progress. Great, I've only got 7 records. However, if I were to click on this button, there are actually, I'm clicked on one, sorry. If I were to look at this table here, there are actually 20 records because this table is filtered just through the filter, but I have not filtered it through any other filter. So again, and it's always something to be careful of. So switch that back to a button. All right, let me move back to my other thing. And then this, again, I talked about updating your flow directly in Power Automate, but the dynamic fields are not available. And then flows can be saved to any Power Platform environment. This is great, especially if you're going to be using solutions, which of course, I highly recommend in the Power Platform, but this will help things to be a lot more organized. So before I move on to Power Apps, any questions or comments? Yes, is it Chantel?
Chantal, do you have a question, or
Yes,
sure?
yes,
Okay.
I do. Hi team, thank you so very much for what you've gone through so far. I wanted to ask you if you could share your YouTube, if you have a YouTube channel, because I think you mentioned a video that you've posted. Can you please share that maybe in the chat?
Yes, in fact, I will do it, but let me do it right now.
Sorry,
Because
thank you.
No, it's see if I can pull that up. I will admit I'm trying to build it, but this is more for fun. I've got a bunch of integrations here, but I will go ahead and share this in the channel. So. And as I get into Power Apps, I have some videos there as well, but we're going to talk about that. So any other questions before I move to Power Apps?
This one posted by Aaron. To clarify, the flow runs on the filter context of the report page instead of a particular visual.
The flow runs on the filter context of the report page. Aaron, can you expand that a little bit?
Yeah, so just like what you said a moment ago, if you have a filter on this particular table visual, it doesn't matter, right? It's just on whatever's fully displayed. So if you add another slicer, let's say on this particular page, what happens if you had done the status, instead of the status slicer that you selected on there, had you selected it in the filter pane on the right for that page, would it have kept the ones that are in progress?
I'll say it'll interact with any. Let me actually go to a different. Oh, where did my button go? Oh, there it is. Let me do it this way. I think I understand your question, but let's move this to a table, okay? If I move this to a table, this visual, even when it's a Power Automate button, is directly will interact with all of your visuals just like any other visual. So if I click on one record here, because this table, sorry, it's a little hard to see here, because this table and this table, because the default, the interaction is there between the two, as I interact with them, it's going to be updating this. Just like if I have a slicer, just like if I do any sort of interaction with one visual, as long as it has that interaction, it will interfere, it'll interact with your data. Where I've seen this happen is somebody will, especially with complex reports, right? You in your table, you build in a lot of table visual filters, but forget to remember that, oh, I did not apply that same filter to my Power Automate button. And then what happens is when somebody clicks on this button, the outcome you get is not what you were expecting. Is that answering your question, or is that?
That definitely answers the question. It makes total sense. I think switching it over to the table view is super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I've learned from experience, but so. All right, any last questions? All right, I'm going to jump to Power Apps. Now, we've done this, and I'm going to kind of follow on this example where, I sent these emails right to the project managers. Now what I want to do is, let's make it easier for them, because what happens is they get those emails. If I'm the project manager and this is delayed, let's see, past due. I might have filtered one. You know what? I'm going to jump over to my Power BI, my published report, so it's not going to matter. And now I want to be very clear too. I am moving over to a published report. So unlike working in Power BI desktop and using the Power Automate visual in Power Apps, you actually have to do what I'm about to do in a published report on Power BI service. I have to say that it used to not be the way that this used not be the case, but I probably sometime earlier this year or somewhere it changed, and now for what I'm about to show with the interaction with Power Apps, you have to do this in a published report, and that's what we're going to do. So let's go through and let's talk about Power Apps. I'm going to start with a very simple example. Now, this is nothing flashy, and all this is I've built this is a Power App that it was a sample one I built. It has no interaction with my report. It's just that, hey, there was a survey, and I have embedded my Power App directly in my report, and it's fully interactive. I can go through here and do the survey. So just simple example, but let's move on to the next one. And I will get into actually how we do this, but I want to give a couple of examples. So here's my example. So I've got this report, and I have my list of projects, my managers. Remember, these are the individuals that got those emails, and they need to give comments. So the normal way is I'm going to go over here. I have a project comments list, and I want to make additions. Well, I want to make it easy for them. So I'm going to go here, and now what I've done is I've actually created a simple Power App, and I'm actually going to do this in my next example. I'm actually going to recreate this exact app, but I want to show you that here's an app that has been created, and it's fully interactive. So if I am if I'm Larry, and I want to go to project 107, which where is 107? I don't know why 107 is showing up. I might not have created this right. Let's go to 114. I can go here, click on it, and again, I can go ahead and make changes, and it's fully interactive. Problem is, there's no interactivity between the two, and that's what I really want. I want to be able to click on this and have it interact with this app, and that's what we're going to do. I'm actually going to jump to give you an example. Oh, I've got one built here. This is the one we're going to recreate. I'm going to go here to project 108. If I click on 108, this is on track. There it is. This is on track. I can actually go here and say, we're about done. I've done that. There's no confirmation screen because it's a very simple app. But if I went ahead and I clicked this button right here, which says submit item, let me go back to my SharePoint list and refresh it. I think that was 108, and you'll see we're about done. So the nice thing about this app is it's fully integrated. Now I have a third example, which I will jump to. And Mark, if in the last presentations that I was given, it was this one right here. This is a bit more advanced, where it's even more integrated. But I'm actually going to show how easy it is to do a very simple app. We're going to actually do that right now. So, and I did walk through doing this before, and hopefully we can do it again in a fairly short time frame.
Okay,
But
as you get started with that, Doug is asking, can survey responses in Power App be replicated into Power Pages too?
I don't know the answer. I don't work in Power Pages. So unfortunately, Doug, I don't know that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I'm going to do this. In fact, I just recorded a video on this on YouTube, so this will be coming out within the next day or so, but I'm going to show you how to do this in a very easy format. So first thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and I'm going to go into edit, and I'm going to delete. Let's go ahead and delete this because we're going to redo this. All right. I need to create the app. Now, great thing about SharePoint, now I'm using a SharePoint list because I do tend to find this works great for things like tracking commentary and notes. I've got my simple SharePoint list created. And in my example, I'm just keeping a title and a comments field. Now, if I go up here to integrate, I'll see Power Apps, create an app. I'm going to go ahead and do that. What it's going to do is Power Apps will automatically create a 3-screen app for me in the phone layout, that layout that we were looking at. And it'll actually create it for me and make it usable. So let's go ahead and have this created. And it does take a few minutes here. But this will make it a bit easier because when I was doing this before in my other version, I was actually creating the app from scratch. But this is a nice little shortcut, especially if you need something quick and dirty. So it'll take a few seconds here. And there it is. What I'm going to do now is you'll see the 3 screens: browse screen, detail screen, edit screen. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's call this San Fran app v3. And I'm going to go ahead and save it, and I'm going to go ahead and publish it. And this will publish it to make it available. Now, it does take a few minutes, so what I'll probably do is pull up a different version, but it's the exact same, should be the exact same one probably. So I've got the app, and I'm going to jump over to back to my report. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to add in, I need to pull up my cheat sheet over here on my side. I'm going to pull in my Power Apps visual, which is right here. And again, similar to Power Automate, it has instructions. Now, Power Automate, it has option for fields. You don't have to add any. For Power Apps, you have to add a field in order for it to be enabled, even if you were just embedding a standalone app. But in my case, I want to go ahead and add in an app. Now, what I want to do is I want to integrate it. I want to integrate it with my data. And let me just also make what I want is, so I have my Power BI report has this project data here, and then the comments, which is coming from that SharePoint list, and the identifier is this project ID. So what I want is this project ID. I want to pass this information because that's what I want to be sending over to my Power App. That's what will be populating this column here. So, and that just happens to be this field here. Now, in my case, I'm only going to add one field because I only need the one field. Other circumstances may need more fields, but in our case, we're just going to do one. What I'm also going to do, because I found this to be helpful, is I'm going to add a little table here. And I'm going to add project ID because I find that this helps with understanding this. Environment's very similar. It does allow you to choose which environment, and when you do create that 3-screen app by default, it puts it in the default environment. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that app. Let's see if it's there. It has not shown up yet. It usually takes a few minutes. I believe this one here is one I just created before. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this one in, and I don't think this is the one I've messed with yet, but let me go ahead and add that. Actually, let me do this. I'm gonna remove this and re-add it one more time, because it usually does just take a minute or two. And if not, I'll grab a different one. I'll choose my app. All right, yeah, it looks like it took a second here. I'm gonna do, let's see, I'm gonna do this one because I think this one I haven't touched yet. But it's the same one. And I'm gonna go ahead and add that in. Now, what it's gonna do is it is going to give me a few warnings here, and now it's going to say I want to go here. I want to go to Power App Studio because I want to go ahead and I want to make some changes to that app. And I'm going to actually delete. I'm going to close this out here. And this is going to go ahead and open the app now in Power Apps for me to make some changes. Now, if you've worked in Power Apps before, some of this will probably look familiar. One thing to be aware of, and this is the integration. This is when you create this field. Let me skip that. Let me allow that. When you add in these fields, okay, what happens is it creates this control called Power BI integration. If anybody's ever messed with SharePoint custom forms, you'll see SharePoint integration in Power Apps. But what this is this is the connector, the data that is being passed from my Power BI report to my Power App. And I want to jump back to my report because remember this table I put? Think of this table here as that Power BI integration with one, it's a table with all these rows, 7 rows, and one column called Project ID. So I've got my 3 screens. I don't need the browse screen because I'm going to remove that. Let's delete that. I'm going to get a couple errors. That's okay. Detail screen I don't need. Let's delete that. Edit screen. Here's my form. This is what I want. I do have an error here, but we're going to deal with that. Let's do a little cleanup right now in this screen. Very simple. I'm going to choose my form, and I want to get rid of this attachments because I don't want it. Nice to have if you want attachments, but let's remove that. And let's expand this comments column, make it a little bigger. And let's make it a multi-line. So that's the first thing I want to do. And there's my form. I could do some other cleanup, but it's already got some capability built in very quickly. So I need to do 3 things. First thing I need to do is, because this is a form, I need to tell it what, which one of my items, if I go up here to my, sorry, I got to click on my form. I need to, there's my data source. That's my SharePoint list. But I need to tell it what item is that I want. And what I want is I want it to look up. I want it to pull in the specific item that is coming from the SharePoint list. So I'm going to enter in this code and I'm going to walk through it. And again, I will have a video out shortly on this as well. So if I go through this quickly, don't worry about it. I will have more information on this coming up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the lookup function, which lookup returns a record. So I want to look up my project comments, where my title field, that is my column, my identifier that I want. And I want the first item in my, now this is where this Power BI integration, and I want the data component. And if I add a period, there it is. That's what I want right here. This is what I'm looking at. If I click here, here's that data. What it's going to do is say, go to the project comments and look up where title equals the first item in this project ID column. So it's going to find this record right here. And that's what it'll do. And it should populate that column. And there isn't one. You know what I did? I deleted it. So let's go ahead and add. Let's go ahead and add that back in so that it will work. And it'll probably take a second, but it should appear here in just a second. Let's see if I can. Of course, right before this, right before this meeting, there it is. I went ahead and deleted that by accident. but there it is. So now it's pulling in the first item in my record. So that's the first thing I had to do. The next thing little user experience I want to do is I don't want this field to be editable. I want it to populate in the project ID, and I want people to have to type it in. I want it to actually populate. And here's the other thing I have to think about is in my list, it could be where, let me go to a different status. Let me change a different status here. Let's go back to a different status where P11, you don't see that in my SharePoint list. So when I go on the form, I want it to populate P11. I actually want it to do a populate. So what I'm going to do here is in the default, and I've got some code that I'm going to copy, but I'll walk through it. See if I can get this code copied here. Oh, sorry, it's in read only. I have to change to unlock my property. There we go. Now I can paste in my coding. And now what I'm doing is this. This is kind of what I'm going to do, and this will be the step, and the next step is I need to know, is there already a record in here? If so, pull this, whatever the default value is. If not, what I want then is to pull the value from whatever is being sent from my Power BI integration. So if I go back over here, that's what I'm doing with this code. So the first thing I do is to say, filter the SharePoint list and find the first item in that my project integration data. So if I were to click on it, let's see if I can click on that. So in other words, it's saying, look up that list and try to find the one where it says P100 and then filter that SharePoint list and then count the rows. Well, if none exist, or if one exists, which means one's already there, then go ahead and list it. If not, display the first, that first row, which would be display this. So I'm actually doing that, and it will do there. And then now I can turn this. I'll be clicking on, there we go. I can just get to a different one so I can make this go away. And I can make this to be this display mode. I can turn this off and say display mode view only. So just a little user-friendly thing. The last thing I need to do is with regards to the form mode. Now, if you've ever worked in Power Apps with the form, there are different modes. Edit mode, where you're editing an existing record, or new mode, where it is adding a new record, and I need to be able to tell it. So if I go to my form, and I go to default mode, you'll see by default it's edit. And basically I have some more similar coding, which basically says, go to that SharePoint list. If it's there, if there's one that already exists, make it edit mode. If not, make it new mode. That's all I need to do. So there, I'm done. And I should go ahead and save this, and I should publish it. And now when I go back, I'll publish this version. Again, it always takes a few minutes, but I can leave this open. I can jump right back to my report. And when I reload it, if I just toggle back and I come back here, again, it'll take a few minutes, but when I reload it, it'll now then be fully integrated. It'll actually appear, and it should be fully integrated. So we'll give that a second to go. I'm going to pause because I realized I did go a little bit quick on that, but let me see, are there any initial questions that I'm not seeing? Assuming all the delegation rules still apply for SharePoint lists. Yes, great question. I'll actually see if it pops up. Delegation, if you work with, and you'll see here are delegation warnings. So yes, if you work in SharePoint, or I'm sorry, in Power Apps, there's a thing called delegation where the data source, you can, by default, will only pull in 500 rows for actions that are not delegable. Delegable meaning that you're pushing the filtering at the original source. What will happen is this: you get this delegation warning, which means if my SharePoint list had, say, 1,000 rows, it's only going to send the first 500. It won't be any issue here because all I'm ever worried about is the first record. And the other thing too, and if this will, when this reloads, is let's see if that will work here. It's not being nice to me. It's going to take a second. The way I've designed this is you should only be clicking on one record at a time anyway, so delegation should never come up. Aaron, did that answer your question? Perfect, thank you. So we'll give that another second, and if not, I'm going to jump to my third example, which again, I'm just going to show it kind of where you can take this.
Okay, and there's another question that just got asked by Bjorn.
Yes. Do you need to share the flows and apps? Yes, you do. You do have to share the apps, so you would have to make sure that it's getting late. Your app is shared. Plus, you have to make sure like your SharePoint has all the right permissions. So great question. And let me see. It is not pulling up. There it is. Okay. So if I click on 102.
There's a little more of a follow-up about that question from Lisa, actually.
Okay.
Also.
Can you speak a little more about permission requirements? In other words, if you have Power BI Access in its workspaces, you have a SharePoint list, you have Power Automate, Power BI in their environment. When do you hand this off to customer? What permissions and types of licenses does the user need to do all these? So I'm going to answer with my best answer. I will say I'm not necessarily a permissions expert, and in my experience, I've only done this in-house within my own organization I've worked in, so not external with clients. But what I have experienced is, the person has to have access to the SharePoint app. This does not require. I'm not a expert in licensing with Power Apps, but I know there's like a premium and pay per user license requirements, which I don't believe will come into play here. In my case, SharePoint is the data source, so whoever is editing this would have to have access to that SharePoint list. So you do have to be cognizant to make sure that though they have access to those apps, just as if you were creating the app as a standalone app. Bjorn and Lisa, does that help? Yes, thank you. Side note, Power Automate, if you need to add permissions, I've actually done this in the past where I've actually had a Power Automate flow that would do that automatically. Definitely a lot more complex, but definitely capable. But you'll see here, I am clicking on it and there it is. And now this flow should be usable. I should be able to make updates and do that. And of course, if I go to, let's see, that's project 105. That worked well. There it is. So within a span of 20 minutes, 15 minutes, we've been able to quickly, and again, I realize I've gone through this very fast.